I totally agree that rent should be able to fluctuate with market.
So they're just like, I suppose, like petty criminals. They're repeat offenders because they know how to play the system.
Before I even approach a rent increase, you need to finally sign off on getting that done, because it's not right.
The people that are making these new rules and regulations don't, again, look at the broader spectrum.
What's your general thoughts on the Renters' Rights Bill?
If landlords don't like what they're seeing coming through as legislation, they're going to say, first thing as you said, stick the house on the market, I want to get rid of my tenants.
Some amendments have sought to link rent increases to inflation.
You haven't got any proof that you're going to put the property on the market. Then 2 months down the line, Mr. Landlord changes his mind.
It's the government trying to make private landlords solve their social housing problems.
But as you say, unless you're a multi-landlord with lots of spare cash, it's going to be too much of a big hit for them.
Welcome back to Your Next Chapter, the podcast brought to you by Power Bespoke, talking all things property. Today we've got a little treat. So you've met Georgie on this podcast, you've met Steph, now you're about to meet Marion, aka Mariano. So Marion joined the team 3 months ago?
Yeah, March.
As our head of property management. And I've talked a lot on this channel about Renters' Rights Bill, and I know a bit, but Marion knows more than me, so no pressure.
No pressure.
Marion is awesome, been property management for 15 years. In a previous life was managing 800 odd properties and a team of 8 property managers. So been there, done it, worn the t-shirt, every possible situation probably solved and overcome. And now she's joined good old Power Bespoke to help us grow and let inside. So welcome, Marion.
Thank you.
So today's focus is go back on the channel and watch my more detailed on what the Writers' Rents Bill actually is and what it involves. Today we're only going to talk about the proposed changes to the bill. I feel like, because it's quite progressed, and I feel like the government are probably backtracking on the few points and it won't be quite as bad as everyone thinks. But we're going to go one by one on the proposed changes and get Marion's thoughts. Starting off there, Marion, what's your general thoughts on the Renters' Rights Bill that started out to be the Renters' Reform Bill?
It's something that was needed to bring things into line to stop some, dare I say it, rogue agents, rogue landlords doing things that they shouldn't be doing, which has caused a lot to do with, the way people are living in the conditions of the properties. But I don't personally think that the bill has been really thought through long term. It's not something that can be done overnight. They should be taking it section by section.
Yeah.
Because there's too many facets that are coming into play that you'll get one thing sorted out, but it's going to cause a problem on another. So I can't see it happening in the timescales that they're setting, because I think if they do, it's going to rush it too much. But, we've just got to wait and see.
That's pretty mad, because you're right, I totally agree. Needed good, right intention, wrong implementation, maybe.
Yeah.
And there's 10 things that they're trying to drop on the industry and landlords at once. Whereas what we're kind of saying is, yes, there was a need for it for certain reasons. We'll come on to that, I'm sure, as we carry on talking. But to try and dump 10 things, and their intention was overnight, right? It was like, this is all going to come in, was the wrong way of doing it. And I think what they're learning as they go through the House of Lords, I think the House of Commons, and then getting Royal Assent, and they were trying to get it done by, I think, the summer this year.
Yeah.
That won't happen. They said October, they said December, who knows? What we know is it's coming. We're on the same page in that we want better quality properties and better standards for tenants. Where I wholeheartedly disagree with the whole bill is that it's taking private landlords' control away from their privately owned property.
Absolutely.
I've always said that my opinion is it's the government trying to make private landlords solve their social housing problems by indirectly starting to make landlords social housing landlords by putting more constraints and red tape around them. And all it's doing is driving them out.
Yeah. Having conversations with landlords currently, I've got quite a few friends that are what I would say trainee landlords, i.e. they've been left to property, unfortunately by parents that have passed away. They've decided that's going to be their retirement fund. Let's rent it out, see if we can, because the way the housing market is, that's going to be my retirement money. Let's put it in the hands of an agent like us, leave it to you guys to manage, and, let me reap the benefits. With all the new legislation that is currently in situ and these new changes that they're bringing in, it's just going to frighten people off. So whereas they want to bring everything together to make onus on the landlord, better living conditions, etc. for a tenant, I think it's actually going to have a knock-on effect the other way, is that, you know, single landlords that make up a large proportion of the lettings industry, those landlords are going to think, do you know what, it's more hassle than it's worth. I'm going to sell this. I don't want to be involved in this because of the long-term effect and the costs that it could have, the implications of that long-term cost. So in effect, it's going to have a reverse effect, because where we want more properties for people to rent, people are going to be selling.
Well, vicious circle. And I think it's already started. I mean, since Conservative government announced the Renters Reform Bill, that had legs. That was like, let's reform an industry that's probably, what was it, 1980s? Was that when the right to buy and all that kind of stuff come in?
Yeah, it's about that.
That's when the big boom, wasn't it, really? Made it easier for buy-to-let investors, right to buy, which reduced the amount of social housing generally, because people were buying their council houses. A lot of those then became buy-to-lets later on. And the idea around it was good. Let's reform an industry that needs reforming. Labour got in, changed the name straight away to Renters' Rights Bill. Just by doing that, you could see who their priority was. And it's becoming a bit of a... I did watch a little bit of it on telly when they're in debating this stuff, and I turn it off because it's like a room full of school kids having laughs and jokes and debating over literally people's lives. It's mental.
I think what it is as well, the people that are making these decisions have never probably gone through what a lot of people that are living in those conditions are like. So have they actually done their homework and gone out and spoken to the likes of us as letting agents, estate agents, speaking to landlords, single landlords, multi-landlords? Have they gone out and spoken to the tenants from council housing to private renters? Have they actually done that research? We don't know. Or is it just a group of people sitting, you know, in the House of Commons or, you know, wherever they feel that they want to, whether it's in their bar or whatever, having a chat, and all of a sudden someone comes up with a bright idea, oh, let's change this. Are they actually in touch with reality? And I don't know whether they are.
And it's called the mass landlord exodus. I think I read somewhere that 300,000 rental properties are no longer, or they're at least on the market for sale or had sold. Properties that were marketed for rental are now on the sale market. I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments somewhere if I'm wrong on that, but I know it was a lot. Whether it is 200, 300,000, it's a lot. Landlords, we see it in the sales side of our business. Many landlords are thinking to us now, when that tenancy comes up for renewal, I want to put it on the market for sale. So it needs to be solved. And I said, and quote me on this, I think in the next probably 5 to 7 years, the majority of landlords will be corporate landlords. There'll be landlords that have got blocks of buildings, they've got 10, 20, 30 properties. I feel like they're 1 to 5 landlords with this, and the taxation and the interest rates have gone up and are going to be squeezed out of the market, which is only a bad thing for rising rents, which actually this whole bill was pretty much for that.
To try and stop it.
Pretty much.
Well, it's going to go back to supply and demand. And it's, as you say, it's the one-off. I mean, some of the legislation they're looking at bringing in is having a different rule for what they call smaller landlords that have maybe got a few properties.
So on that, one of the proposed updates or changes is that the proposal where some amendments have suggested that landlords with fewer than a certain number of properties, i.e. fewer than 5, should be allowed to continue using a Section 21 notice. What's your thoughts on that?
It's a bit hit and miss, really, purely and simply because if you're going to reform something, you bring everything under one umbrella. So you're going to then get, if you've got a tenant that is in a property where the landlord's got less than 5, they get served Section 21. But then their next door neighbour, their landlord may be a landlord who's got more. Their rights and the sections for their landlord to get them out can be very different. And so it can be a conflict of interest, I think. So again, it fires back to, they can bring these things in, but have they got the backup in place to actually push these things forwards?
Well, interestingly, one of the things on that is they've put the argument here is that smaller accidental landlords, like the one you mentioned earlier, inherited a property, or maybe someone bought a one-bed flat as a first-time purchase. They then have the ability to keep it as a buy-to-let rental to buy the next house without selling it. They've got one property. But the context is that, or the argument is that it's for landlords may have less capacity to navigate the complexities of court proceedings and strengthened Section 8 grounds. We'll come on to the Section 8 in a minute, but that's the point, as in, like, it just needs to be what it is. If it's going to be yes or no.
Again, even though with whether it's a Section 8 or a Section 21, if you're working with a good agent, before you even take a property on, when you're having the conversation with the landlord, tell them what we can do, and they can take out the things like the rental warranties and what have you to stop certain things happening or help prevent. If that then happens, say for instance that they're wanting to serve notice on their tenant because their circumstances have changed, they need their property back. It may be that a son or a daughter has finished their education, going to be working up in London. I'm going to now give my property to my kids to live in rather than paying London prices. Still keeps it within the confines of the family, but that's what they want to do. That's their right, it's their property. For them to then try and get rid of their tenant, and if a tenant doesn't want to go, it's costly. If a landlord has been guided correctly and takes out insurances to help him guide him through that process, the emphasis isn't on the landlord, it's under the legal system that he's paid into for things if it has to go to court. So there are loopholes that the landlord doesn't have to jump through. He can prevent those things or give in those guidance. So the reasons that they're giving for their landlords to be under the area that if he's only got 5 properties, Section 21 is still applicable to him, I think that is a fine line. It's a little bit debatable.
Well, the trouble is that with Section 8 as well, as you were saying in the car on the way here, that you were speaking to a solicitor and they literally said it's 16 weeks before you even get a date, pretty much, just to process the paperwork at the court. The court just cannot cope with anything else.
I have been to court many, many times in previous employment. You spend lots of time at Croydon, because obviously I worked in South London and in Surrey, in Croydon, in Kingston, and even sometimes in Bromley. And the backlog from the time we issued Section 21 till it came to fruition could be easily 6 months. Obviously that was backed up even more with COVID. And I still think now we've never really fully recovered from what happened with COVID. It has literally just been a knock-on effect.
And that's like really, I do think that's really unfair. What they're saying is you have to go basically Section 8, serve a Section 8, it has to have grounds and it can be defended, and people generally don't pay their rent whilst they're being taken through the courts to move out, right? So then you've got a landlord maybe 4, 5, 6 months worth of not paying the rent arrears, then a separate claim potentially afterwards to get the rent arrears from the person that owes it. You might get £1 a week or whatever it might end up being. I think that is the real problem. And if the courts were set up for it more, fine. There was talk about a separate court and just to handle this kind of stuff. That's never going to happen. And one of the things that they've said here as well is delaying the abolishment of Section 21 because the courts can't cope with it. You know, we know that most public services at the minute are pretty under strain. The courts, the NHS, the police, everything. And they've put here that one of the most significant and debated amendments has been the abolition of a Section 21 no-fault evictions until the court system is reformed and deemed capable of handling the increased volume of possession cases under Section 8. So the courts can't even cope now with the Section 8 whilst we've got a Section 21.
So they're looking at amending these and bringing all this new legislation in. So supposedly, I mean, they kept delaying and they're saying going to have another hearing in June, July. Well, obviously, you know, they close for the summer period, so that ain't going to happen. Then they're talking about October. So if they go back after, you know, different recesses that they have, for it to come into fruition in October, I know they're going to do it only on new tenancies. That's what they're saying, on new tenancies.
Most
and then
likely,
existing tenancies, that's going to be delayed till sort of like mid-summer next year, 26.
Well,
but if the courts haven't, sorry, Perry, but if the courts haven't then they haven't got the setup with the courts while they're planning all this, they need to put that in place beforehand. Because straight away, if landlords don't like what they're seeing coming through as legislation, they're going to say, the first thing, as you said, stick the house on the market, I want to get rid of my tenants. So straight away, it could potentially be that the cases go from flurry, 0 to 100, with the absolute hours, and then they've got no backup to actually push it through.
Well, that's part of the problem, is they've not even confirmed whether it will or won't apply to small and big landlords. They're still debating whether or not they should exclude landlords of, say, up to 5 properties and allow them to still use a Section 21. But interestingly, though, the general consensus from the government stance on that change was suggested from the National Residential Landlords Association.
Yeah.
And the government stance is a typical stance. The government has acknowledged the need for court reform and has expressed a commitment to improving the system. However, they've largely resisted amendments that would create an indefinite delay, aiming for a big bang implementation. I just feel like they could have said, here's 10 things we want to reform over the next 5 years. We're going to start with these 3. But there's so much, and landlords are just like, forget this. I'm not making enough money from it at the minute anyway because of taxation and interest rates and blah, blah, blah.
You think how many changes that have been in since 21, 22?
Yeah.
So we've had the gases, we've had the EPCs, which again is going to be changed. EICR, it's 5 years since that was brought in. So obviously people now, those certificates are starting to expire.
Yeah.
So landlords are having an expense on that. EPC regulations are going to change again.
Because the thing is with EICR, sorry, on that point, good point, but if legislation on the electrics changes in that 5 years, there's a lot of landlords that have got to spend more money to bring up to standard, and that's outside of the decent home standards we'll come on to in a minute.
Yeah. So all these changes, it's all, I suppose in some ways quite rightly, because you are the property owner, it is your property. But as you say, unless you're a multi-landlord with, lots of spare cash, it's going to be too much of a big hit for them. So that's why, even I think sort of like smaller corporate landlords that maybe only have 50 properties, if they've got to make changes across those 50 properties, they're going to look at the costings of that, to look at what their yield is of how much money they're actually making, and that's when they may turn around and say, well, actually, over the next 5 years, we are going to offload, so many properties per year. So, which then defeats the object of why they want to bring the bill in. We need more houses, and if you've got more people selling, the houses aren't going to be there for people, or flats.
How I can see this going is it's going to be an absolute train wreck, and they're going to bring in loads of incentives to be landlords. Stamp duty incentives, be like, damn it, this hasn't gone to plan. We've actually lost more landlords than we've gained. So now, please become a landlord. Yes, there's more legislation, but here's some help.
Yeah.
Be interested to see how that pans out.
So where's the funds coming for that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the next proposed amendment, which is ironic, is the retaining fixed-term tenancies. Now, let's bear in mind that the whole point of this bill was to give tenants better standards. Totally agree with that. To give tenants more security. Semi-agree with that. I mean, when you're living in someone else's house, it's someone else's house. So if you want security, you need to go into social housing, is my opinion. I'm going to get slaughtered for that in the comments, I'm pretty sure. But what they're trying to do here now is, the proposal is, amendments have been proposed to allow for the retention of fixed-term tenancies, particularly up to 12 months, or to allow tenants and landlords to mutually agree to fixed terms. Because the irony here is, the proposal was to give tenants more security, as in no fixed term tenancy. I'm not quite sure how that gives them more security. If you want to give more security, you would say minimum term 3 years, right? But they said, let's abolish that and let's just do a rolling tenancy. And what they've suggested here is that if it's mutually agreeable, then fine, you can do a fixed term. If the tenant wants it, if landlord wants it, great. Some have also suggested allowing fixed terms to continue if both parties agree. The outcome, this is interesting, while largely resisted by the government, have no idea why, a compromise amendment was passed that effectively creates a minimum 6-month tenancy by allowing tenants to give 2 months' notice only after 4 months.
Well, that's like an existing 12-month contract with a 6-month break clause that they can already serve notice at months too.
Exactly.
If they're on a fixed 12-month.
I don't get that one. What I do get, if a tenant can move in for a week, serve a month's notice, which is what they're kind of proposing, and move out again, that's terrible on landlords. They're going to have so much check-in, check-out, redecorating.
Oh, the cost implications is horrendous.
Touching the wall up when the wall's dinked because it's not really classed as damage, it's more wear and tear. So that I kind of agree with this, but I just think, don't play with something it doesn't need playing with. If a tenant wants a 12-month tenancy and the landlord wants to give it to them, let them do it. If they only want a 3-month rolling, let them do that.
I mean, the thing is, and again, this is going back to COVID times, a contract is a contract. And as we say to tenants, when they want to serve notice early, if they're not within their notice period, a contract can always be got out of if the landlord and tenant are willing to negotiate. And obviously that's where we come into it. And, people's circumstances do change. People can get relocated. They were thinking they were going to get relocated, but a job opportunities come up and, I'm moving from Land's End to John O'Groats, but I'm stuck in a 12-month contract. There's things that we as an agent can do to stop loss for landlords and help a tenant. So things can always be changed, but it's one of those situations where it's got to be give and take on both parts. And I think with some tenants know how to play the system, and their circumstances may change. They don't want to go because of or renew a contract and want to get tied in again. They're looking to go to the council. The council will always turn around and tell them stay there until eviction, because they won't rehouse them. They won't rehouse them if they're in rent arrears. So it's a snowball effect. It's not just the root cause; it literally splinters out. So each individual case has to be looked at. And again, I don't know whether the government and the people behind sorting this out have really looked into each situation, each scenario.
We had a situation recently, actually, where a tenant fell behind. And he, fell on hard times, I get it. But the landlord is a private landlord. She solely relies on that income to support her life. The council said to us, if you will allow him to stay living there, we'll clear the rent arrears. If you won't, we won't.
But then if he's fallen into hard times and rent arrears once...
Well, this was the problem, is I explained to them, look, it's nothing against him, nothing against you.
Yeah.
The landlord just needs someone that's got a bit more of a stable background now.
Yeah.
And he needs help from different parties, not Mrs. Miggins, who solely relies to feed herself from that rent. And they were like, okay, well, we can't clear his rent arrears, and I apologise. Like, it was just so...
flippant.
Yeah, and this ties in really well actually with the next proposal that they're proposing to change, which is rent arrears threshold and universal credit. So let's bear in mind as well that as part of the bill is that universal credit will now be classed as discrimination. As a private landlord, you pretty much can't decide who you do and don't want living in your property. Same with pets. Go back and watch videos on this. I won't go too deep right now, but there's new areas. So universal credit is classed as discrimination if you don't accept it. Pets, you have to give them permission to have pets unless there's a reasonable reason not to have one, like a first floor flat with no garden.
Yeah, that then comes down to it. It'll be interesting actually to see if they then... I know we're talking about doing things with management companies. So if you're in a block of flats, yes, you are the leaseholder and that is your flat, but obviously you've got to abide by the rules of the leaseholders and the block. Yeah. So if the block rules turn around and say they won't allow pets, it means your landlord isn't allowed
Can't
to
allow pets.
So it's not the landlord that's discriminating, it's the freeholder of the block. And the block management agents have sort of said, these are our rules. So the landlord, he may say, yeah, I'm an animal lover and I will allow a dog in the property, but it's the blocks. And the
mortgage companies sometimes as well.
Freeholders. Yeah.
Freeholders, management companies, mortgage companies. And interestingly, in a previous video, I mentioned this, but they're actually saying that they can't force the lenders or the management companies to take that out of their clauses, because also it's like noise as well, like so antisocial behaviour. Your dog barking's classed as that. But what they will do, they won't force them to take it out, but those terms won't be legally admissible in court. They won't be allowed to pursue it in court. So the term's in there, but it's pointless because they can't do anything about it. That's a whole other story. But this whole rent arrears thing, I found this really interesting when I read this proposed update. So the proposal is that amendments have been proposed regarding the mandatory rent arrears grounds for possession. The bill initially aimed to increase the threshold from 2 months to 3 months arrears, which I, in a previous video, was like, that's terrible. If someone's in arrears, they're in arrears. They need to help to get out of arrears, but not necessarily help by the person's house they're living in. It's not like, have another month and see if they're in hard times and can't pay their rent, they're probably not going to be able to get out of it too quickly. So then they've put, there were also proposals to remove a provision that would exclude arrears caused by delayed universal credit payments from counting towards the threshold. What I found hilarious about this is, it's 2 months notice, unless it's a government payment, then it's 3 months. You have to be 2 months in arrears before you can get evicted. Unless it's a government's problem, then it's 3 months. It kind of...
So who then pays the landlord's mortgage
Yeah.
So does he go to the government and say, well, actually, you've held this up, so you're going to pay my mortgage, or when my house gets repossessed,
My
or
mortgage
whatever,
being
are you
paid.
going to pay that because the problem is down to you? It's literally just deflecting.
Yeah, and I think it's fair that 2 months rent arrears can trigger a Section 8. Bearing in mind, we've just said previously that it can take 16 weeks before the paperwork's even bloody processed through the court.
But don't forget as well, the way that, again, that with Section 8s, and this again is where lots of what I call real, true professional tenants that know the law inside out, their rights backwards and forwards, which is fair enough if that's the route that you have to go down, because for whatever the reason is, your circumstances are, you have to rent, is that I've come across it many times, and it's like, oh, here we go again, Joe Blogs, issue him with another Section 8, and he just pays
To keep under 2 months, yeah.
a little bit of money to pay under 2 months, therefore that Section 8's out the window, all that paperwork for nothing, and then we start again and we have another month or so and the same thing happens. So they're just like, I suppose, like petty criminals. They're repeat offenders because they know how to play the system, again, which is at no fault to the landlord. And it's always a conversation we have to have with landlords when they first come to us and say that they want to put their property up for rent, is that we have to have the conversation with them to say, if you're renting your property out in order to cover your mortgage...
Yeah, don't be reliant on it.
Don't be reliant on it, which really they shouldn't have to do.
No.
But you have to give them that guidance because, there is always that strong possibility that your tenant is not going to pay your rent.
I would say to landlord, you've
Your
got to be able
mortgage.
to support this property for at least 6 months
Absolutely.
of no rent, obvious. And look, I've had situations over the years where the loveliest of tenants have moved in. I remember one, actually, really, really lovely family. The husband was the main income generator, and he had a really bad accident. He's self-employed. He had a really bad accident at work, broke his back, actually, and he just was lovely about it but couldn't pay his rent. He didn't have the insurance that he should have had for income protection, blah, 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 but that's his prerogative. But that decision of his not to do that then caused the landlord a problem, because the landlord then had a lovely tenant who was like, I want to move out, but I can't. I've been told to stay where I am. I've been told to wait until I've gone. My landlord took me through the process, and the council will only do anything once the bailiffs have literally knocked on my door to say I'm changing the locks today.
Yeah, give you a bit of paper and then you can go to the council.
Yeah, and so that is the process, and all because of the lack of social housing. There's nowhere to put people at the minute, so they're making it, in my opinion, landlord's problem.
See, there again, what you've said there is something that the people that are making these new rules and regulations don't, again, look at the broader spectrum. The onus is all going down to what the landlord needs to do. It's all going back.
Yeah.
It's your property, your responsibility. You've got to do that. You have to then put some onus back onto tenants. Now, I used to work with an agency a little while ago, and part of the process that we had was helping the tenants and having the conversation with them. When you said about having sort of some income protection, is to sit them down, and part of our process was to say to them, if it's husband and wife and 2 little ones, that's fine. She's maybe on a part-time because of the kids at school, nurseries, that sort of thing, or he was just solely the breadwinner. If he was to fall out of work through, as you say, sickness, losing his job, whatever, what protection has he got? Because he potentially could lose his home because the landlord would serve notice. So again, the government should also look at the broader spectrum to say maybe they should put some onus on the tenants, and that they should bring some guidance into this is what you should be doing, or you should be looking at, or is be part of the rental process for them. So you're protecting both parties.
That's where they had the opportunity to reform it and make it really good for all parties, to say,
absolutely, it's very one-sided.
Tenants, just like mortgage companies insist that you've got to have income protection.
Absolutely.
Landlords should be able to say you have to have income protection, otherwise you can't move in.
Yeah.
It's a bit like they've got the new landlord database, right? That's part of the bill. Won't go into it in detail because they're not proposing a change to that. But there's a new landlord database. Why is there not a tenant database as well? Why is there not a place tenants can go on and give landlords good or bad reviews? Why can't they do the same? A bit like an Uber, a bit like an Airbnb and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm all for all of this as long as it's both sides.
Yeah, you've got to have total transparency. You can't put rules and regulations down to landlords that are trying to. Yes, they're making money from it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
Not all of them. I've got some landlords that are losing.
Yeah, it used to be that that's why they were doing it. So Yes, it's there for a small business or for whatever reason they're generating some income. So you need to protect them, but also the tenants need to be protected. So it's both sides. You know, there's always two sides to a coin, and you've got to look after both parties, not just one.
As soon as it switched from a renters reform bill to a renters rights bill, it's big. There's already a massive divide between landlords and tenants, right? And I think it's not nice because tenants without landlords would be absolutely stuffed at the minute because there's not enough housing, social housing in general. But interestingly as well, the next one, which is I do really agree with, to be fair, this being amended, is the bill is already limiting rent increases to once a year. We've only ever done that anyway.
Yep.
And Marion made a really good point in the car as well, is that it's all landlord, but there's a lot of really lovely, great landlords, but the managing agents are complete shysters. And they're the ones that are driving the rinsing the flannel every month of rent increase where you can, or just let this one over here for £100 more, so we should increase your rent by £100 more, and all this kind of stuff. And what the bill proposes a change is, while the bill limits rent increases once a year to allow tenants to challenge increases, some amendments have sought to link rent increases to inflation or introduce further limitations. What do you think, the linking it to inflation?
That's a tricky one, because it's always already a question that gets thrown back to us. Why are landlords putting up rent when my gas is going up, my electricity is going up, blah, blah, all these bits and pieces? Well, that's the same for a landlord. His gas is going up on his own home. His shopping bill's going up. So, again, His labour cost for maintaining the property you're living in is going up. Yeah. I mean, whereas before you could get a contractor to go out, you know, X amount of money to go and have a look at something, you know, those costs may still be the same, but the parts that he's having to pay, you know, wood, electrical components, all those things. So that's pushing his prices up as well. I mean, we would normally say at the moment 6 to 8% that we've been saying, but we're going to landlords and saying, no, that's currently 6 to 8, but we're only proposing an increase of 5.
Well, that's the trouble. Like, when you link it to inflation might be, 2-3% or something? But the market, let's not forget that the property market, sale market, rental market is a market that fluctuates quite heavily, actually, season to season, month to month, year to year. But if the market's gone up 8%, which in our areas pretty much has, you cannot possibly link it to inflation. That's a ridiculously stupid idea. But what you can do is what we do, is say to landlords, look, we don't take the mick out of tenants. Your tenant's good. They pay the rent. That we inspect it regularly. They're looking after it lovely. We think we should propose maybe a 4 or 5% increase. Not kind of ramming it right where what you could get and what you should ask for are two different things. I think.
I've had some, as you know, some conversations recently with landlords where they've had good, stable tenants and they're really happy with the way they're looking after, and it's obviously come up for renewal, and we're going out first thing, because obviously we don't own the property. We'll go out to a landlord and say, this is the current market, this is what your property is currently, you're renting it at, done our research in the area, we could get X amount for you. But because the tenants have been long-standing, we're not asking for that. We're asking for that. The amount of landlords that have come back and sort of said, don't want to do a rent increase.
As in, like, they're happy.
Yeah, they're happy.
They don't want to be on the tenant.
I've not stopped it there. I've still gone back to the landlord and said, at the end of the day, you do what you want to do. It's your home, your rental property, you know, it's your property. However, on the flip side, you could be doing your tenants an injustice. And this, again, going back to the COVID days.
So I'm going to pause you quickly. I totally agree with this train of conversation and go with it, but you're going to be slaughtered in the comments for this. But please go with it, because I've done this before and I got slaughtered, and I had someone say in the comments, making it sound like rent increases are good for tenants. What a DICK, I think he called me.
So
be nice to Marion, all right? Give me all the bad comments. Be nice to Marion.
No, but the reason I'm saying it is purely and simply is if a landlord doesn't put up the rent by a small amount.
Reasonably.
Annually, as and when, for whatever reason, that landlord may want to take back their property because their circumstances have changed. They may have lost their job and therefore they're needing to sell their...
Or they're sick of all this nonsense and they want to sell it.
Or they're selling their property or going to move, a son, daughter, whatever the reasons, their circumstances have changed and they need to take back possession of their property. That tenant that then hasn't had a rent increase for 2, 3, 4 years because the landlord's been good and said, happy with the tenants, then that tenant has to move out and wants to go and find a lovely 3-bedroom house like they've got, still within the area because they've got kids and out of school. They are going to have a complete and utter shock because in 3 years, what they haven't had their rent increase to what they've now got to go and look for a new property, they're way out the market.
The reality,
They've been priced out of the market.
And then they're straight down the council.
And then, so then it comes to Section 21, they can't afford it, Section 8, whatever, all these things. Or another delay, council can't rehouse them, they've got to get evicted. And it's, so you can slaughter me as much as you like, but it's in reality. And I've seen it over the years, time and time again. And the biggest time that this came into fruition was because of COVID. Landlords didn't put the rents up because of what was happening. Then the following year, they thought, no, let's get people back to normality. Let's let the system adjust and, So it could be 3 years before those people had an increase.
Yeah.
Then the landlords looked at what, if they were to remarket their property, how far away they were from what their rent was currently
Well, most
at.
landlords were forced to do that because base rate went up. So they were like, I don't want to be out of order on the tenant, but I also need to make sure I'm not losing money on this every month.
Yeah. So to bring things in line, some landlords were literally like £200 and £300 adrift. We couldn't give that an increase to a tenant. So, small increases had to be done. So there's still landlords from those points at that time that are still not up to, because they wanted to keep their tenants, because they like their tenants, but they're still so far adrift even now because you can't recoup that amount in a shorter space of time. So you can slaughter me, but what I'm telling you is facts.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because we see stuff on the other side, right?
Yeah.
And this comes from a real position of wanting to help everybody.
Yeah.
Don't slaughter your tenants. And if you could, say they're paying £1,500 a month and you could get £1,650 if one round the corner in the same block's just let. You put it, if they're paying 15, could get 16.50, 15.75. Be reasonable with it. But the problem comes when, and this is where someone in the comments was like, haha, making it sound like it's a good thing for the tenant. It actually is. My mortgage has gone up from £1,000 a month to £2,000 a month. These things happen. And I can't say to the mortgage company, no, sorry, don't increase it to that. I ain't going to pay it. It's really important that you stay in line with the market. The flip side to that as well is, though, let's hope for tenants one day the market turns on its head and there's such a supply of property that rents start coming down. And then on renewal, tenants can be saying, actually, I'm paying 15, I should be paying 14.
Yeah.
The issue isn't the landlord, it's the market.
Yeah. And I think as well, what people that could be slaughtering us don't realise that we are the middleman. We work on behalf of tenants and of landlords. Yes, landlords that are renting their properties through us and managing their properties, we work, managing their property, but we also have a duty of care to be fair to tenants as well. And if we think a landlord is asking for an extortionate amount, we will tell them. And, you and I know that we have actually turned around to landlords before and said, if that's what you want, we will terminate our contract away. Go and find another agent, because that's not how we work. So, whereas people think we're working solely for the landlords, we're not. We're working for both parties.
I've said to landlords, before I even approach a rent increase, you need to finally sign off on getting that done, because it's not right. It's not fair. Yeah. Yes, we've got a duty of care, but we're also just good humans as well. We want people to live in good houses. We want landlords to be fair and reasonable, and we want people to pay the reasonable market price for what it's worth. And too many people bash the landlords and bash the estate agents to be like, you drive rents up. Like, no, we don't. The market does. And if the market someday turns and rents are driven down, we'll be saying to landlords, you need to drop your rent down a bit because it's too high for today's market. The trouble is there's been more than 10 years of not enough building of property in general, let alone social housing. And here we are discussing amendments to the Renters' Rights Bill to give renters more rights in private housing. Just don't get it.
Yeah. And I think especially the way that we work is that we are not afraid to have those difficult discussions with landlords to say, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. We're not proposing a rent increase until those works are done. And it's building that rapport with those landlords and getting them to understand.
We've had tenants come to us recently that have said, no rent increase for a couple of years, I want rent to go up.
Yeah.
because I feel like it's going to go from 0 to 100 overnight. And I said to him, don't panic. We're not increasing rents on that block at the minute because there's a few things that need to get done.
Yep.
And when we do, it won't be astronomical. We will need to, but it'll be a staircase gradual increase.
Yeah. And again, it's tenants know that, you know, behind the scenes with all these things happening, you know, things may change for them. And if they are in those situations where they have got to move out,
Yeah.
they want to be able to, as I said before, go from a 3-bedroom house that they're paying X amount for to another 3-bedroom house and hopefully still pay the same money or, you know, £50 a month more.
Yeah.
But if they're too far adrift, they're going to be absolutely screwed.
And I am going to get slaughtered for this, but I've got my beliefs and opinions, and they come from a good position of wanting to help everybody. But whatever happened to the fact that you just can't afford to live in that area no more? You know, that sounds really harsh, right?
Yeah.
But just because a certain area has gone really high on rents, maybe you've got to move to a different area. Maybe your budget now allows you that you might need to move more up north, and that's horrible. But it's not the private landlord's problem to keep you in an area that you can't afford.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where a landlord had a knee-jerk reaction because she thought she was wanting to put her property on the market. So without her thinking it through, she asked us to serve the tenant a Section 21. So we served the Section 21, but the tenant had only recently renewed with the understanding from the landlord that she was going to be there long term. You know, she's got kids in school, one doing GCSEs, one doing this. It's that sort of situation.
At that moment, the landlord situation was that. And
Yeah.
fast forward 3 months, there's a life event and it changed her situation.
Yeah, and that's what we have to say to tenants. You know, unfortunately, just because something is signed and they've agreed to something, again, circumstances change. Luckily for the tenant, the landlord's had another change of circumstances.
Sorted it out, so
and it's reverted back. But her situation was exactly what you said. She's like, I can't afford anything in this area. There's nothing within my budget. But if you've been there a couple of years in a really nice area and markets have gone up, then unfortunately, if you've got kids in school there, I understand that, you know, mother of 2 grown-up kids myself.
Yeah, I've got 4 of them.
And you either have to then look at moving schools or stay in the kids where the kids are.
And downsize a bit.
And downside a bit.
How that kind of ended with the rent increase regulations and linked to inflation, yada, yada, yada. Understandably, I get it. Tenants' rights groups are pushing for stronger rent controls to prevent excessive increases. The outcome of that so far is that the bill's current provisions aim for market rate increases that can be challenged rather than strict caps, which I agree with. I think if a landlord's trying to take the mick out of a tenant just because they've been there 2 years, they've got 2 kids, they know their kids go to school, and you do get these kind of landlords as well.
Yeah.
I'm not defending all landlords here. The bill was pretty much set up because of 20% of the rogue landlords. 80% of landlords are amazing, lovely, nice people. 20% ruin it for the 80%, which is pretty much life, I think, in general. And I totally agree that rent should be able to fluctuate with market. It's a bad situation that the market right now is sending rents high. Probably flattened a little bit the last few months, I think. But there'll be a day, let's hope, for tenants, like I said, that it's the other way around. There's loads of properties built, loads of new homes, there's loads more social housing, and the supply gets more, the demand doesn't increase anymore, and rent starts to come down. Then it's, you know, how much should we drop the rent this month or this renewal because market has gone down. The final thing, there was dispute resolution and court capacity. I want to touch on that again because I just don't think they'll be ready for like 2 years. I think this will be postponed for ages. But the proposal is, beyond delaying Section 21, many amendments and discussions are focused on the need for significant investment and reform in the court system and the new ombudsman scheme to ensure they can effectively handle disputes. To me, that's like a little test. You know, let's do it for this amount of properties to test it. The context of that is both landlords and tenants will rely more heavily on these mechanisms once Section 21 is abolished. Because for anyone that doesn't know, Section 21 is a no-fault eviction. It's just, I would like my property back, please. That won't be allowed anymore. You've got to give a reason. Rent arrears, breach of tenancy, antisocial behaviour, I want to sell it. I had a call the other day from a landlord and said, I want to put it on the market for sale, but if I don't sell it for the price that I need for it, I'm going to want to rent it out again. What happens there? And I really didn't know. Because you can serve notice because you or your family member want to move back into it. You can serve notice because you want to sell it. But then there's like a 12-month window, I think, that if it goes back on the market within 12 months of the tenant moving out, the landlord can get really badly in trouble.
Yeah.
what if after 4 months the offers coming in aren't the level that the landlord wants, and so on month 5 they want to put it back on the market to rent? That's a real grey area.
Yeah, because we have seen that happen, haven't we? Where people have wanted to. Well, I would say like 1-2 weeks ago, she served a Section 21, and within 4 weeks
retracted
it. Again, that's something that they need to look at, because again, you won't know whether you can sell your property until you've tested the market. Now, does it then mean that you serve a Section 21, and you wait until that tenant has moved out? Then there's a period of time, you say, that you have to wait before you can then market the property. And then are they going to add another clause in to say you can't remarket until after that? Again, it's something that they're going to have to look at, because otherwise that will be what people will be saying, is that a landlord will say, well, I want to change the circumstances, or I want to get rid of that tenant, use a Section 21 because I'm going to be, and again, this is defending the tenants, not the landlords, is that serve a Section 21, I want to get rid of that tenant because I'm going to sell my property. You haven't got any proof that you're going to put the property on the market. Then 2 months down the line, Mr. Landlord changes his mind. We ask us to re-advertise it. We find someone else, and then you've got the poor tenant that's moved out, had to, the upheaval of finding somewhere new.
It goes so deep, because you could put a rule to say that if you want to sell your property, the tenant must be living in it whilst you're trying to sell it. But some tenants aren't particularly helpful when it comes to selling if they don't really want to move out.
If they know they're going to be going, yeah.
So that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
And the final thing, the right to request pet insurance. I think this is pretty much agreed, in that if someone requests to have a pet and there's no good reason to say no, the landlord has to allow it, because the pets come under discrimination, yada, yada, yada. But what I think they are going to allow is to insist that the landlord, that the tenant has specific pet insurance for damages. I think that's fair.
Will it be, when they say pet insurance, do they just mean that they'll put an extra deposit, or
they can already ask for that? They can.
Got that already, haven't we?
It's not even a higher deposit, because we can't ask for more than 5 weeks period. No. But we can ask for a bit more money per month.
Yeah.
But what they said here is the bill introduces a tenant's right to request a pet. Got it. Totally agree with that. I've got 3 dogs. With landlords only able to refuse on reasonable grounds, i.e. you can't live in a first floor flat with 3 dogs.
Yeah.
Amendments have been proposed around the specifics of this, including the ability for landlords to require pet insurance. The outcome is that the bill generally allows for pet insurance to cover potential damages.
Insurance companies are going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Whether or not they pay out, as we know what it's like when we're going through certain claims on things already, that will be sort of like, watch this space. Because insurance companies will issue the policies, but then actually trying to get the money out of them for the landlord, if we need to.
It's interesting to watch in the next few months, and we're keeping an eye on it. Obviously, we want to keep these videos coming through to keep you up to date of what it's like day to day on the ground with this stuff. You've got landlords asking us questions, we don't know the answer yet. You've got tenants that don't even know what to be doing. I think tenant education for the law in general is always good. I think not enough tenants know enough about tenancy law, even now. I think a positive of all this is that it's bringing to the fruition that landlords can't do stuff that the tenant probably assumed that they could get away with.
Yeah.
And tightening up the industry, the quality of the standards, the quality of homes, making it more fair for tenants, but without completely shafting the landlords, I guess is how I want to put it. I've said it before, I'll say it again. This to me is the landlord's way of making private landlords help solve the general social housing problem. Can't say no to this person, can't say that to person, can't put it right up here, blah, blah, blah. It's pretty much making landlords social landlords. So we'll keep the updates coming. That was a quick overview of the proposed changes. There'll be a link in the description if you're a landlord or a tenant as well, by the way. We're not just here to help landlords. If you're a tenant that's got a bit of a unscrupulous landlord and you want to pick our brains on where you stand and if what they're doing is right or wrong, book a call with the team. Marion or I or Michaela or the rest of the team can have a chat with you. If you're a landlord that's stuck with a problem, we're good at problem solving, aren't we, Marion?
Yep.
Give us a shout.
Getting our teeth into it.
And we'll see you on the next video. Take care. Marion, thank you as well. That was awesome.
Pleasure.
Shared loads of knowledge, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.